Hi, I'm Zareena and today we are going to do situational writing. Alright, just to let you know, you should be aware by now that for your writing component there is two sections, right? The first one will be situational writing followed by your composition. Now, some of the things which I want you to take note of even before I start on the type of question is, number one, I want you to remember your timing. This is very important because since they give you situational writing first, there are cases where students spend too much time on this and then they realize that, wow, I've written a beautiful letter but I don't have enough time for my composition. Make sure you keep this in mind that this component should not spend too much time on it. Maximum, I would say maybe 30 minutes. Why? Because it doesn't require you to think too much, one. Second, there's not much of a word limit for this. Probably it's what, 150, 200? Much lesser than that of your composition writing. Composition writing, you do have a word limit and you must make sure you write that amount. For this, as long as you answer the question, you don't really have to think so much, use so much fancy words, you get all your points down, you will get your marks. So this is something I need to highlight even before I go on further. Don't spend too long on this section, about 30 minutes should be fine. Now, the second thing is, you have to understand that I hope you have by now started doing some questions, especially for the Sec 1s. You don't have a choice in this matter, okay? No choices are given. Sec 2s wouldn't have a problem by now, you should be aware of this. Okay, unlike your composition, you don't have any choice, which means you must know your format. So that comes to my next point. Format is pretty much 50%, you could say. Alright, this is one part of writing where if you don't get this right, you're not going to get your marks. This is important. So this part is a little tedious for some of you, especially if you're the kind whose memory is not that good. You have to definitely memorize the format. If you don't have the format, again, you're going to lose marks. Yes, and that comes back to no choices are given, okay? It's not like composition where, remember I was telling you, find out what you're good at, keep practicing that type of question. No, because for this, at your level you are lucky. Sec 1, Sec 2s, maximum they will only give you formal, informal or maybe reports. Unless your school happens to be the sort which asks you to train up on other parts such as proposal writing, speech. But those are usually for Sec 3s and Sec 4s. So you only have about 3 formats, remember. And since you have no choices given, definitely you got to remember each one of them. You can't take a risk and say, I'm only going to learn this and I'm going to pray really hard it comes up. Okay? So keep this in mind, not too much time spent for this section. No choices given, so make sure you remember your format. Now, since we have got that out of the way, then I can start with the first part, which is your informal letters. This shouldn't be a problem because compared to formal letter writing, it's a lot easier. Alright? And in case you I'm sure you'll be wondering, right? Oh, what do you mean by letters? We don't write letters anymore. That's okay. Just keep in mind that if you write emails to your friends, right? I'm sure you all do. So if you have emails, just follow that. More or less, it should be the same way. Of course, I'll come to that. Yes, you must keep in mind that informal letters are for friends and relatives, and yes, it's almost like how you write emails, but something important you have to remember, even for informal letters, what do you think is the most important thing I'm going to tell you here? Your language. Alright? This is important. And I cannot stress this enough because I have lots of students who comes up and tell me, oh, you told me that it's like emails to my friends. So what's wrong if I write things like cos or gal? By the way, G-A-L is not an accepted spelling for girl, okay? I don't understand why a lot of you think this is correct. And yes, it gets worse after that. A lot of SMS languages, a lot of acronyms comes in. So keep in mind that even though this is supposed to be a letter to your friends and relatives, language has to be, this is out, okay? There's no slangs. You can't have slangs. So I'm going to write that down here so you can remember. So points to note, no slangs, and that goes even for American slangs, okay? I don't understand why you students think that it's okay to write American slangs like guy and gal, you know, things like that, cause. So this kind of thing is the same thing. Slangs are not acceptable. It doesn't matter which type of slang, whether it's a Singaporean one or whether it's an overseas one, okay? So no slangs. And yes, you can use informal language, but what do I mean by that? When I say informal can be used, it means you can use things like, for example, your salutation. You don't have to start with dear Mr. John. Hi, how are you doing? No, you can actually start with dear somebody, or you can also start with hi. All this is actually acceptable. And you don't have to sign off by saying yours sincerely, yours faithfully. You can have things like love or kisses and hugs, things like that. Okay, you can have that. So that's what I mean by informal. Another thing for informal which I want to point out is you can use contractions. What do I mean by that? I mean things like didn't. I don't know if you're aware that you're not supposed to use this for your formal letters. You can't. Alright? I'll come to that later. Didn't, can't. You can use that for your informal letters. So language, no slangs. You can use informal, things like didn't, can't, salutations, you know, like, oh, hi, John, and then you can sign off by saying, you know, like I say, love, kisses and hugs, warm wishes, things like that. You can have all that under language. In a way, it's very flexible, as long as it is, again, grammatically correct. So let me get to that. Okay. It has to be grammatically correct, meaning what grammar, what tenses are we supposed to use? You're writing a letter. Now this is a bit tricky. It's not like composition. In composition, when you write, you're writing about events that has already been done and over with. But in a letter writing, it's a bit tricky because yes, you're writing about events that has been done, but what if we were discussing, let's say you're writing to your best friend and you're saying, oh, I'm so excited about that trip we are going to take in May. See, May hasn't come yet and you're talking about events that's going to happen in the future. So your tense is a bit tricky, but again I'm going to stress grammar is important, but your tenses depends. Okay, that is why students don't score marks. Alright, even though it's so easy to score, they don't score because the language part is very tricky. They add slangs. Here is not too bad, alright. I'm going to put things like words like can't and don't here. So you know what I mean by informal language, okay. These are called contractions. I can also say that, let me see, do I have space? Yes, maybe I can write it here. You can also have words like hey, hi, you know, things like that. Love, maybe you can sign off. I don't know, love Sam. Of course, you don't need the underline here. I'm just letting you know that, okay? Alright, then tenses. This is a bit tricky, like I told you. But try to keep in mind that if you're writing about the past, it should be the past tense. And if you're going to talk about something that hasn't happened yet, it's future tense. So, should you be using the present tense like I am going to learn, I'll be learning swimming? Depends, okay. So this one I cannot tell you that, oh, you must use this tense or you must use that type of tense, because it really depends on the events you're talking about. So just keep in mind, if you're talking about the past, use the past tense. If you're talking about something in the future tense. What about present continuous? Like I am learning guitar, I'm learning to play the guitar. Can you use that? Yes, you can. Because remember, in a way, letters and emails are like conversations with people. You're talking to someone. When you talk to your friend, you don't just talk about what happened yesterday. You also talk about what will happen tomorrow, what you plan to do tomorrow, what are you doing right now. Like for example, if you're talking on the phone and you're on the internet downloading this awesome music, so you're going to be telling your friend, hey, you know what, right now I'm downloading this is really cool, you know, things like that. Yes, coming to which, do not use words like cool. Cool is also slang, okay? But yeah, so tenses depends on what you're talking about. Rough guide, think of whether the event or the incident has happened, is about to happen, or is happening right now. So other than that, of course, you got to know your punctuations. I don't have to repeat that again. That's important as well. There wouldn't be much punctuations needed for a letter other than a full stop, comma, maybe semicolon, but I think you can do without that, right? But yes, for language, this matters. And because it's a situational writing, it matters a lot. You lose a lot of marks if you can't get this down. And you'll be surprised just how much marks that students lose because of all this. The other thing is, of course, under language comes your format, which I'll go through. If you're wondering why is it I'm not going through content yet, I will, because I'll give you a sample question and then we'll run through it. But let me run through your format first. So keep in mind, under informal letters language, you have got format, you've got to make sure there's no slangs. You can use informal language such as can't, don't, things like that. Grammar, make sure you take care of your tenses. This is very crucial because a lot of students lose marks because of this. The other one is punctuations. Keep it simple. Just keep this in mind, alright? Your story when you write, keep everything simple. And the other one which I taught you before in composition is if you really find your sentence structure is very poor, keep your sentences short. It doesn't have to be very long, okay? Same things, same rules apply more or less except for the tenses. Now let's go to the format. Alright, I'm going to come over here. Alright, the format is really quite simple, okay? The first thing, okay, let's just say, now I'll give you the question, so it's easier for me to go through content as well. I'm going to just write down the points here. Just visited your cousin. Let's say your cousin is in, I don't know, let's give it something exciting. Let's say your cousin is in Cairo. In case you're wondering where Cairo is, that's in Egypt. Alright, so if you look at your question, your situational writing question, they're going to say that you have just returned from visiting your cousin who lives in Cairo. You've had a good holiday, you've stayed there for about 2 weeks. Then they will say, write a letter. So that's where the crucial point comes. They will say, okay, write a letter, in this case, thanking, keep in mind, thanking him for his hospitality. Hospitality meaning allowing you to stay over, things like that, alright? So, thanking him for his hospitality. Why am I emphasizing this point? This happens, see this, you see this? Sometimes when students write the letter, they will change the cousin into a girl. I don't know why they don't understand. You must understand that if the question says a guy, it is a guy. Don't change it or it's considered out of point, okay? So, you must write a letter thanking him for his hospitality. Then other points to take note, they will tell you this. You're quite lucky, alright? They give you some points, maybe 3 or 4. And these are points which you must include in your letter. So when we discuss format, I want you to remember that. Number 1, take note of the question. If the question states specifically that, you see, the question states that your cousin lives in Cairo, you cannot change it to something else. Of course, they're probably not going to give you such an exotic place because they do know that maybe kids your age are not very familiar with the country. But this is just an example. Then the second thing is these points here. After the question, they'll give you a few points. Make sure your letter contains all of them. So maybe they say that ask about his exams. Okay. Then maybe they'll ask you to tell him about your new pet. Then maybe lastly they can ask you to invite him over. Okay. So before you start on your format, make sure, so I'm going to write down the points here, right? Number 1, read question. Read and take note. This should be common sense, but again, you lose marks, alright? You take note of the points. Invest in a highlighter. If you don't have a highlighter, use a pencil, it's fine. But do that. See, thanking him. Your cousin is in Cairo and these points are all important. This is like a checklist. When you read and you check your situational writing, which I emphasize again is important, please, when you time yourself for your writing, make sure you leave at least 10 minutes, 5 minutes for your compo, 5 minutes for your situational writing. Trust me, you will find a lot of mistakes. Even those writers, those authors, you ask them, how long does it take for them to actually write a book? It is not the writing, you know, it is the editing. And you find a lot of mistakes. So make sure you do that, okay? Take about 5 minutes to read through. When you read through, use this as a checklist. Make sure all these points are here, because this is your contents. That is why initially when I started, do you notice that for composition, I emphasize on contents a lot, but over here I emphasize on language? The reason is because there is not much of creativity involved here. There's really very little brain work, you know, because they're just asking you, they're like, it's like comprehension, ask him about his exams. So you just write about that. And they are not going to like judge you if you only write maybe like, oh, just 3 or 4 sentences for that. As long as you meet the writing, the word limit, answer the points, your content is done. Awesome, you'll get the marks for that. You will only lose marks in your language. That is why I emphasize that. So use this as a checklist. Once you have got that done, okay, the next thing is your format. Now you will have plenty of formats available. I'm very sure by now your school would have given you the formats as well, right? But just to run through, the first thing you have to do is, okay, let me just take a look at this. Okay, the first thing you have got to do is write your address. And yes, here there's a lot of confusion. It's very funny, okay, because just the other day I was asking my students, and these students happen to be Sec 4 students actually, whose address should you be writing? All of them told me, okay, listen now, all of them told me, you must write, in this case, the cousin's address on the letter. Now I ask you a question, why should you, this letter is inside the envelope. So you are sending this letter to your cousin. Why should you write his address on that letter? It's not logical, right? The postman is not going to tear open the envelope and look at the letter and say, oh, this is supposed to go to Cairo. So common sense, guys, whose address should it be? It should be your address, alright? So let's just say that we are going to put here, I'm going to put it right here. So I'm just going to say something like that. And then there's this question which I get. Okay, this is quite a common question. Whose address am I supposed to write? Mine. But then what do I write? My real address? Do I do a makeup address? What do I do? Okay, this one is simple. If the question says that, oh, write your I mean, they give you an address, use that address. If they don't give you the address, yes, you can write your own, but if you are afraid that your examiner or your teacher will stalk you, you can just change some of the details. You don't have to write exactly the same thing. All they want to see is that you've got an address down, okay? But for that reason, please don't give me something silly like, oh, Tom and Jerry Lane, I live up in Hickory Hill House, things like that. Something a little bit rational and logical. So you have that. Then what is the next thing you should have, right? You should have your date. Okay, let me just check if I've got it correct. Yep, you got the date, and then you have your salutation. This is very simple, okay? And yes, all on your left hand side, please. That means if this is your letter, that should be all on this side. It's long time ago, okay? Probably in your parents' time where, you know, they got it, they were, oh, you know, the date is here, the letter is here, the signing off is here, it's all over the place. No more. We are following this format now. So the date, oh yes, please. Do not write the date like this. Okay, that's not correct. Try to just write it out. For example, like this. You can write it like 17th January 2012. Then your salutation should be dear, and then you have the name of your cousin. Make sure it's a boy, okay? So you can give whatever name you want. And then the last part is, after you write your letter, you should sign off. Okay, you got to sign off. And your sign off can be like love. Remember what I told you? Things like that. Any number of it is fine. Usually people say love, or and then they sign off like that. So this is your format. Quite simple, right? And make sure you leave a line. For every one of it, you leave a line. Then you start. Okay? So it's quite easy. I think you can remember that. So if I were to show you roughly how it looks like, it will look like this, okay? That means if you want to see how it is in a piece of paper, it's going to look something like this. Okay, it's going to look, so if you got a paper like that, okay, so I'm going to have my date, then I will leave one line, sorry, I'm going to have my address, okay, I'm going to have my address, then I leave a line. Okay, then I will have my date, then I leave my line again, then I will have my salutation, which is dear somebody, right? Then I leave a line. Then I will start my letter. Yes, and letters have paragraphs, okay, which is another thing I have let you know. So you have one paragraph here, then you leave a line, then you go to the next paragraph, so that it will look neat. Every paragraph, before you start every paragraph, you have to have a line, leave a line, okay? So that is your format. So keep that in mind. Let's see if there's anything else I have to cover. No. Okay, so let me just rehash once more. So for situational writing, informal letters, your language is very important. Under your language marks, they will take into consideration your format, which I already went through just now. I'll go through it once more. Format, make sure there's no slangs. You can use informal language, meaning things like hey, hi, you know, sign off by saying love, things like that. You can use contractions like can't and don't. Grammar, like I mentioned before, tenses really depends on what you're writing about. Punctuations, keep it simple. Nothing more than a full stop or comma is necessary. So coming back, right, I give you a sample question here, like you just visited your cousin from Cairo. These are the points. So what are the points you have to consider is, number one, remember, you're supposed to read and take note, because this is your content. Alright, this is your content. If you cannot answer these points, you won't have your marks for content. Alright, so the second thing you got to keep note of is your format, and your format always has your address. Just remember that. Your address followed by your date, and your date has to be written in full, okay? And then dear John. Should you have a comma? Not necessary. We don't use commas for this now. Okay. So no comma. Just keep that in mind. Leave a line. Leave a line again before you start your paragraph 1. Every paragraph, leave a line. Sign off. Something informal will do. Do you have to sign? Good question. Yes, you can if you want to. For example, love John. So maybe above you can do something like this if you want. Right? So with that we come to an end for informal letters.